and welcome to the 65th episode of Everyday Eternal. With me tonight, as usual, is my co-host Bob Wang.
Hello, hello.
And as our special guest tonight, from Washington, D.C., Jarvis Yu. Hey, how's it going?
It's going well.
Thank you so much for being on the show tonight, Jarvis. We have a lot to talk about tonight. You did really well recently. But first of all, I just want to hear, how's it going, guys? Bob, you haven't been on the last cast. What have you been up to?
Yeah, not too much. I haven't been able to test as much Magic as I'd like. I think Legacy has changed a lot, and maybe we've finally gotten to the point where we may have a best blue deck and possibly best deck. So the reason I invited Jarvis on was basically he won the last quarterly format playoff. It was almost 200 players. And so congrats to Jarvis. He played no quote unquote no bad cards RUG Delver. So that's kind of why we have Jarvis on the show today. But I'm kind of excited to dive in and talk about where Legacy is going for SCG Syracuse and GP Atlanta.
Yeah, same here. We got a lot of things to talk about. We also have a lot of data that we will look into. And Jarvis, have you already mentioned you took down the Legacy playoffs on Sunday? How did that feel?
It felt fine. I actually normally do not play those Sunday events because most of my day job is sitting at a computer for, 8 to 9 hours a day, so I don't play a lot of the Magic Online events on the weekend. I talked to Anurag about this before. He was like, you should stream those challenges. It's like, I don't want to strain my eyes even more on weekends when I don't have to, frankly. Besides that, I actually was playing a lot of Modern lately because I thought Modern Horizons changed the format a lot, and there were a lot of interesting decks to try. I was actually a huge fan of Hogak before it got banned, frankly, but, you can't have your shiny broken deck forever,
Yeah, so what are you on in Modern right now? I hear that, I think they call it Versa has been doing pretty well recently.
Yeah, I've talked to Stefan Schutz a bunch about it. He top-aided Grand Prix Barcelona with it, and I think the deck is really good, and I've been learning it, but it's not the easiest deck to play or build correctly, I think.
But you found success with that deck as well.
I have not found any success with it yet, but, I'm going to just keep trying and learning, you know how it is.
Awesome. And I guess Bob and Jarvis, you're both going to be at Atlanta, and I think it's 2 weeks from when we are recording right now.
Yeah, and there's also a Star City Games Open this weekend in Syracuse, New York, that we will both be at.
Yeah, I heard about that. Is it a team open or is it a dedicated?
It's just a dedicated Legacy Open.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a big thing as well.
Yeah.
And you're both going to be there, of course.
Assuming my flight doesn't get canceled again, yes.
Didn't that happen recently?
It did. I tried to go to SCG Dallas, but there was a hurricane in Dallas, so they wouldn't let me fly there, so I just went back home.
Oh, okay. Well, at least you get your money back, right?
Yeah. It was fine.
Okay. We're shortly going to talk about what you are going to be up to in Syracuse and Atlanta. But first of all, I also want to say that a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today will be on Channel Fireball. I think, Bob, help me out. When is your article going live on Channel Fireball?
So I haven't written it yet, but I plan to write it next week following SCG Syracuse results, as well as there's going to be a Magic Online MCQ. So I want to incorporate those two events into the data. So it'll be slightly different from what we talk about today, but should be mostly the same.
Okay, so unless Murphy becomes the breakout deck of Syracuse, this will be pretty much, hopefully be the same that we're going to tell you about. So yeah, that's just what I want to say for people. If you want to follow the data, I think we're going to have it in the show notes, or at least in Bob's article on Channel Fireball, so you will be ready and have all the necessary data available for your insight into GP Atlanta. I think it's the last Legacy GP in the US of the year, right? The only.
Yep.
Actually, we're going to.
That is correct.
Yeah, I mean, we got lucky that we got 2 this year. I guess we've had 2 for the past few years, which I feel lucky about. I do feel bad that Asia didn't get one this year, so Japan kind of missed out. But hopefully next year, hopefully we get 4 or 5 Legacy GPs next year. But we'll see.
And if you are in Asia and you want to play high stakes Legacy, you should definitely go to Beijing Olaf in the first week of November. It's not only super high stakes Legacy, it's also the payout that's out of this world. I think we're talking about 150% of the entry goes into the payout, and you don't really get that anywhere else around the world. So shout outs to that. I'm going to be there, and maybe we can see some more international participation.
Oh wow, Julian, you're going again then.
Yeah, I'm going
How expensive
again.
are tickets to China from Germany?
So the return flights, the cheapest one that I found with a non-weird airline is around 500 euros.
That's not bad.
That's pretty
I mean,
expensive.
it's not cheap, but it's not like you can do it every year or like every other year and not feel that bad about it.
I've seen more expensive flights to other places, but this one I guess I'm pretty lucky with regarding being from Munich, because Munich apparently has a pretty good connection there. And the only thing that's expensive is the visa, right? Actually, it's not that expensive. For Europeans, it's 125 euros. And last time I was there, I enjoyed myself so much. It was one of the best Magic trips I've ever had. And if you want to come this November, we're definitely going to make sure that you're going to have the same experience. So if you want more information about that, hit up James Yu on Twitter, and we'll make sure everything is.
Yeah, I would like to go to at some point, not this year, but maybe another time.
And plus, Bob's Chinese is better than
Yeah,
mine.
we're both Chinese, so we should go there at some point, Jarvis.
Bob's Mandarin fluency is much better than mine is.
But are you also conversational? Would you get along, or are you still a bit rusty?
I can speak. I'm just much worse than Bob, and my pronunciation's it's much worse than Bob's.
Jarvis, I got to practice.
I know.
Maybe we should do the rest of the cast in Chinese.
I think our Mandarin friends would appreciate that. James tells me we have maybe like a couple listeners who listen to our podcast from China and know about us, so that's kind of cool.
We do. And there's also people in the Chinese legacy scene who translate the most important articles that come out so that the people who don't speak English can actually still read them. And because
That's cool.
there's only so much legacy content on the web, they are trying to bridge the gap in that way, which I find really amazing. In speaking of legacy content, I think the first time I ever heard about NBC RUG Delver, No Bad Cards RUG Delver, was an article on minmaxblog.com. Is that correct, Jarvis?
That sounds accurate. I think even before that, Max references Adam Yurchik, who may or may not be a name you recognize, as playing a very early version of this deck. I think if you track it, Condescend did well in a challenge with a Rug deck that looks somewhat similar to this. I can look it up real quick. For those of you who don't know, Adam Yurchik is a long-time legacy / vintage / all-around good Magic player, I think is the way to put it.
Wasn't he also heavily involved with Ad Nauseam Tendrils at some point?
No, that's Adam Prozac.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, July 28th, 2019, Condescend goes 5-2 with basically this deck, like a version of this deck. Not all of the numbers are exactly the same, but it's the core shell, I would argue.
And for those at home listening who don't have access to the show notes right now, it's basically RUG Delver, Canadian Threshold, but the cards that have been cut are the Stifles, the Nimble Mungus, and the stuff that has been added are 3 Ren and 6, 2 Dreadhorde Arcanist, a Hex Drinker, 2 True Name Nemesis, 2 Preordain, and I guess a Force of Negation. Playing 19 lands, one of them a Fury Islet, which is the Horizon Canopy land for blue and red, and that's pretty much the way the deck looks right now.
That's the exact list. If you want an explanation of the deck, I think the best way of thinking of this deck is just that it's more built like a Jund deck than you might expect. So, you basically removed all of the conditionally good cards. Stifle is the epitome of a conditionally good card, right? Because if you're on the play and you stifle their first fetch land and wasteland them, they're basically going to lose most of the time. But a card like True Name Nemesis or Preordain, those are pretty much good on most turns of the game.
Yeah, so how did you start playing the deck? Did you start playing in a couple leagues and streaming it, and then you decided to play it, or how did that happen?
So, I mean, you remember that I did play a lot of 4-color Delver, the Friedman-style Delver deck, which is essentially the same as this deck, I would argue, in a lot of ways. It might not look the same, but the play patterns are very similar because what you're trying to do is implement a mid-range plan with your Delver deck. So I have historical practice with this sort of deck, but also, yeah, tracking just how many people are playing this deck and how well it does in challenges and the weekly whatever league legacy things. It seems to do very well, and it seems to even do better the better a player plays with it.
Oh, and that's always something a lot of people are also looking for, especially those who are more invested into the format. If you can get in the reps of the deck and get a real advantage out of that, that really draws you towards a deck like that. You also mentioned that you used to play a lot of 4-color Delver, and to those who follow Legacy only occasionally, they might know you for winning a GP with lands, top 8ing the very next one as well. And I think when we went to Vegas, you also got pretty close to top 8ing another one. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was 7-2 going into day 2, and my losses were pretty late on day 1, but I 6-0'd and got 9th on breakers, which can happen. I'm not going to complain about that. But the Eternal Weekend right after that, I played Friedman's 4-color Delver deck because he insisted it was broken, and I made top 8 there as well. And I had 0 buys for that event, I think. You can get buys at that event by winning like various trials. If you win 2 trials, you can get up to 2 buys essentially. But I didn't have any buys for that event, and I think I went 8-0-2 in the Swiss of that event and lost in top 8 to Death and Taxes with Friedman's 4-color Delver. The thing that was unique about that Delver deck was it had like a bunch of Snapcaster Mages and Abrupt Decay and Bolt. So it was a true 4-color deck. But really, if you looked at its mana base, it was blue, black, splash, red, and green.
That's what a lot of people actually say. It has 2 core colors, and then it branches out into 2 other colors for more tools.
Underground Sea was the best land in that deck, whereas this one's just straight Rug, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the main reasons to play this deck is it's Rug instead of the current 4-color Delver deck is also 4 colors.
Yeah.
But that one's more like it's Rug splashing black, but the mana base is extremely shaky. And so I tried that deck. I know you tried it too and also didn't like it. But I also wanted to know, how many times have you actually played this version of this deck?
Would probably guess around 60 matches, which is not a large N, but I have previous Delver experience. It's not like I'm starting from the very beginning.
Right.
I mean, I remember playing literal Stifle Canadian Threshold back in...
Yeah, I'm not counting those versions, but you're saying even like a version close to this version, you've played, 60 matches, which is a good sample size, I would say, for getting a feel for how the different matchups play out. Which was kind of the next thing we wanted to ask about. So I've only played this deck through a couple leagues, and my initial impression was that it was powerful, but, I faced a lot of cards like Choke, and then I also faced a bunch of mirrors, which seemed really coin flippy. I don't think they necessarily were coin flippy. I think the way I built my deck was perhaps not optimal. You made some changes that I really like you added 2 spell snares to the main deck. But basically why I felt it was coin flippy was Renin 6 and Dreadhorde Arcanist were just so overwhelmingly powerful that if they were active for 1 turn, you were way behind. And then if they were active for 2 turns, you were like almost so far behind that you couldn't come back. So that was kind of how I felt about it. But you kind of addressed that in your deck building and were able to win a lot of mirrors in the top 8.
Yeah, so the impetus for Spell Snare, I actually saw Autumn Burchett tweet about it literally the day before. They played, a team event in England, and Autumn said, I think this deck is great. Here's the cards I played. Didn't agree with all of Autumn's choices, but one of the things that stood out to me was Autumn played 2 main deck Spell Snare, and that I thought about it for a while, and it just seemed so logical that that card would be great right now.
Yeah, it makes sense. It also gives you more leverage against Renin 6 when you're on the draw.
Right.
Whereas I feel if your opponent lands a Renin 6 on their play on the second turn, and they get to untap with it, which they usually do, I guess even if you get turn 1 Delver, Renin 6 just shoots it down.
That actually introduces one of my least favorite play patterns nowadays, which is you have to try to figure out if you're supposed to jam the Delver on turn 1 now on the draw. I think you're generally supposed to and just hope that you don't get obliterated by a Ren, but obviously it's going to suck if it happens.
In that way, the card always strikes me as kind of Chase-esque, in the sense that if you ever get to untap with Chase, it's so hard for your opponent to win. But I guess if you untap with Renin 6 in a non-combo matchup, it's also pretty rough for them.
Yeah.
Is there actually a way for you to climb back into the game to beat Renin 6? I guess you have 2 named Nemesis or multiple Tarmogoyfs.
If you don't have to throw away a Delver into it, I think it's a little bit better for you. Because if they don't have Wasteland Ren going, you can actually win. The real issue is when you get waste-locked in those mirrors, then the game becomes like almost untenable, unless if you draw like 3 fetch lands in a row. Would you agree with that,
Yeah, I definitely
Bob?
agree. Like, the Wasteland Lock is very scary in the Delver Mirror, and that's one of the things that always is usually able to be assembled just because you play so many cantrips.
So, like, actually after Horizons came out, I tried playing lands itself, and I actually got waste-locked by a bunch of Delver decks repeatedly. I'm just like, this is stupid. That's supposed to be my role. But the problem is, if they just force of all your exploration, their deck is so much better at waste walking you than you are them.
That's actually something that one needs to be aware of. I've seen players who wouldn't really attack the exploration, thinking there's probably something else I need to force fill, but that card is really important.
I actually think exploration got a lot more important because they don't play mana bonds anymore because that card kind of sucks. So if you stop their acceleration, then your Ren can just like keep them off of any of their plans, really. Like, it's kind of phenomenal. If you just kill all of their like colored sources or, Thespian stages or whatever, and make sure they don't get to crop rotate, they can't really do anything to you.
So you would say you feel comfortable playing NBC RUG Delver against lands?
Yes, I would. I also think I understand the choke points of lands better than most. I mean, I'm willing to let some things resolve that I think a lot of people wouldn't.
Give us an example. What is something people fight over way too much?
I think people don't fight over Mox Diamond enough, and people fight over Gamble too much.
That's a good point. I guess Mox Diamond is a card you'd rather not have them have, because of the tempo, but also because it's a permanent mana source, so they are always guaranteed to have at least 2 mana.
And also, if the dirty secret is lands mana base is actually terrible.
Oh yeah, man, tell me about it. I played it 10 years ago when it was actually quite different, but I also struggled for green sources many times.
The problem is the deck has always cheated on green sources because it counted Mox Diamond as part of its mana base. So a lot of the hands they keep are a keep because Mox Diamond gives them green.
In speaking of Mox Diamond decks that focus on lands, how do you feel about playing this against the depth deck that Bob recently won an SCG Classic with?
Yeah, well, screw Bob. Well, no, Bob beat me in that tournament in round 6 when we were both 4-1.
And he declined the ID or something.
No, he declined the split, which I don't blame him for, but we were playing a Depth's Mirror, and I found those mirrors to be pretty coin flippy, personally speaking, but he had a slight edge with Dark Confidant, I think.
Agreed.
And how do you generally feel about going up against it with NBC Delver?
Okay, so one of the reasons to play this version of Delver is I think you're actually favored versus Dark Depths. That might sound weird, but there's a lot of good things going on here. Spell Snare in particular is actually phenomenal in the matchup. A lot of the times they have to resolve Hexmage or Sylvan Scrying, especially in Game 1, to assemble their combo. And the post-board crop rotation Caracas or crop rotation Wasteland thing is just super annoying for them to get around.
Yeah, I could see that. You have a lot of ways of interacting with them, even though you don't have Stifle.
I've also played plenty of games of normal Delver versus Depths, where you just like randomly aggro them because their hand's not quite fast enough to assemble their thing. Like, there were opens where I played against Dave Long playing Depths as Grixis Delver, and I would like manage to win like 2-1 a few times because like if you just sneak in the damage when you need to and like chump block with your Delver once, maybe you get to kill them, with like a bunch of lightning bolts or whatever.
That basically gives you a second attack step by throwing your Delver in front of it. And post-board, you got other tools like crop rotation, Caracas. Did you ever get to Vapor Snake a token?
Not in this tournament. I didn't actually play against Dark Depths in this specific tournament. I did in leagues, and I have Vapor Snagged it. I honestly believe it's one of the weaker cards in the sideboard. It's pretty much only good in that matchup, because the problem with Vapor Snag and other matchups is you really want to kill their things permanently, not just let them recast it a turn later or whatever. That being said, it is good with Dread Horde Arcanist because sometimes you just like Vapor Snag, untap, attack with Arcanist, Vapor Snag their other blocker, and they just take a huge attack where they weren't expecting it.
Yeah, it can provide a reasonable amount of tempo. But you also mentioned, and that's something I found very interesting, because that's usually a statement made by someone who has played a reasonable amount of matches with a certain deck. You said it often plays out much more like a chunt deck than people would actually believe. A lot of people, when they see Delver, when they see Daze, when they see Wasteland, they think it's a tempo deck and it has to press naturally for a really strong advantage. And the deck is certainly capable of that, but this is something that was shown to me 3 years ago by Jonathan Alexander, how the deck can actually play a lot more like a midrange deck. He even went as far as to call it a hard control deck when he was playing against Miracles.
I think the way he built his decks, generally speaking, was to actually board into basically a rug control deck. And that is certainly an approach you can take. It eats up a lot of your sideboard slots. You need like a bunch of counter spells and ways to win late games. But Every time I saw him post a sideboard guide, he's like, yeah, I side out everything that dies to Plow versus Miracles to just blank all of their cards. So you gain effective card advantage that way because their Plows don't do anything, right? Because you have True Names and Nimble Mongoose versus their Source of Plowshares and whatever, that's not a good matchup of cards, right?
And the way he made some of his tax encounters work was to play 3 Winter Orb. And that was the first time I actually saw this much more mid-rangey Chant-like approach to the deck. Now, this deck, looking at the sideboard, isn't really fully capable of that, I would say. I guess you have Chase as a one-off, but even in the main deck, I can see how the cards can play a more grindy, mid-rangey game with Drudge Arcanist or, I guess Hexdrinker as well.
Well, back to that comment about Jund. You're already the Jund deck in game 1, so you don't want to devote many cards to further transforming. Jace is a nice pickup when it's good, obviously. Like, when it's good, it's really good. Someone once said Jace is greater than all, right? Like, that still sort of remains true in Legacy, right? You resolve it, your opponent doesn't kill it for a turn 2, they're basically dead, right? The thing about Hexdrinker is I believe the first copy is the best copy because drawing the second one is really not good in a lot of situations. However, I did Progenitus it multiple times in the tournament, and once was even versus a person who had like a bunch of graveyard hate. So if you look at this deck, you're actually sort of soft to Rest in Peace, right? You count 9 cards in your main deck that are not particularly good versus graveyard hate. Hexdrinker is good versus graveyard hate because it's Savannah Lions, then it becomes Progenitus.
And as you mentioned, the first copy is usually the best, since you don't really want to split your mana investment between the 2 copies.
Right.
I guess it's already pretty hard to kill once you get it to the second level, where it gets protection from instants.
Yeah, the other thing too is it has like only 1 toughness, and I did see you kind of side it out on the draw in some of the Ren and 6 mirrors, and then leave it in on the play. So you can't play too many cards that you have to take out on the draw.
I was actually thinking about that. I wonder if nowadays you should actually consider shaving some Delvers on the draw in these mirrors. I thought about it for a while, and then I decided against it because you still need spells to pitch to Force of Will. And if they don't have the Ren and 6, it's still one of your better cards, right?
Right.
And for those wondering, you would definitely keep in Force of Wills in a Delver mirror, because in past metagames, there were actually people who would cite them out for a good reason, right?
Let me explain my philosophy on that nowadays. I think the problem with siding out your counters in the mirrors nowadays is there are too many haymakers that cost a cheap amount of mana. Like, Ren is a haymaker that costs 2, Tarmogoyf costs 2, True Name only costs 3. So if you take out all of your counterspells, you're leaving yourself being exposed to being run over in exchange for not 2-for-1ing yourself. I consider Force of Will an insurance policy, not a necessity. I'm not looking to cast Force of Will if I don't need to, but it is nice to have the option to do so.
Yeah, and I guess you rather 2-for-1 yourself on the Force than lose your Delver to the Ren, because that's basically a 2-for-1 in itself, right?
Yeah, agreed.
So one thing you did say about the deck, Jarvis, was that you felt like it didn't really have too many holes. Let's talk about that more, because if this is a deck with very few holes, maybe it is actually like the best deck, and maybe it'll become like Grixis Delver or Miracles was eventually, given it enough time. Do you think it potentially has that status, or do you think there's some ways to attack it that people are not doing as much yet?
If I were to build a deck that was good versus this one, it would be white-blue based, but it would play the card Supreme Verdict, and it would also play Spell Snare. I don't know the exact other details of the deck, but I believe those are the 2 best cards versus deck that are not commonly played.
The problem with blue-white is it's very hard to beat, Delver plus Combo plus Chalice. Well, I guess Stoneforge Mystic. So I guess you're sort of describing like a Stoneblade deck tuned to beat it, which I agree. You can definitely, tune a blue-white deck to beat RUG Delver. However, those decks, I'm not sure that those decks could ever be more than just another solid deck.
My issue with the current blue-white blade decks is I think they're not controlling enough to be able to beat this Delver deck, because the approach they take to beating this Delver deck is to try to go slightly above it with equipment, and I don't think that is a good strategy. If their strategy was to kill all of your creatures with Supreme Verdict, no questions asked, Spell Snare, Ren and 6, then I think they're probably ahead in the matchup.
I feel like we're acting a bit like Sherlock Holmes here, trying to solve a crime case. We have all these clues. We know we want Supreme Verdict. We need a decent amount of Spell Snare, but we also should try not to be too much of a dog to combo. So is there anything, not pressing you for an exact deck list, but is there anything that you could see with regards to a threat base that could work? Because blue-white, often struggles because they can't really lock out the game. They can counter your first 5 spells, but then they draw past them flames and they kill the blue-white player. So is there something like Vendilion Click on your mind, or I don't know, maybe even a combo finish of your own?
The card on my mind versus combo decks is still Narset, Parter of Veils. It's the problem with Narset is that it's not good specifically versus Rogue, in my opinion, but it is very good versus most of the combo decks.
That's interesting. I watched Anurag's stream, and he talked a lot about how he doesn't really like Narset anymore, but still plays a lot of Teferi. And I feel that's almost, at least from my perspective, the quote-unquote downfall of these decks, when they get so invested in a card like Teferi, and I feel they can't really play Narset anymore at that point. When at least from my perspective, Narset is still a very good card in the metagame right now.
It's kind of a similar problem to, I think, Dark Confidant and Dark Depths. It's like one of my best cards against most of the field, but it's just really bad against Wrenn and 6 and like Blue-Red Delver. But it's so powerful, but it's kind of like Narset. Narset seems, pretty good against a lot of decks, but it's not very good against Delver.
Whereas Teferi is bad in all of those editions. No, I'm sorry. I'm just really biased against Teferi. I don't think the card's...
Yeah, I mean, it's like a 3-mana bounce spell with upside, is how I see it. But that's not really saying all that much. I don't really see what Anurag sees in the card either. It is good in, like, control mirrors, so...
That being said, I 5-0'd with Barn Food Chain last night, and that felt really good. I got to minus Teferi on my guy, what's the name? The Hideaway guy?
Watcher of Tomorrow.
That's the one. I minus on it, and that felt amazing.
I like Teferi in combo decks, like you mentioned, Food Chain, maybe even like Infect and Allurin, but yeah. In control decks, it's not as good. One
note about Teferi is I think it's way better in Standard and Modern than it is in Legacy. Mostly because it is like there's so many good things that cost 3 or more in Legacy that you kind of have your like pick of the litter there. Whereas in the other 2 formats, like Teferi's pretty good card and there's not as many options, right? I don't know.
In speaking of combo, how do you feel NBC RUG Delver fares against the more prominent combo decks in Legacy right now? There's some kind of resurgence of Sneak Show that has done well on previous weekends. There's also Storm coming back up again. Do you feel comfortable facing them with a lot of cards in the main that don't really do too much to them, I would say?
I'm going to answer that with a comment about some of the sideboard choices I have. I think game 1, generally, you're not too happy to draw your red cards like Lightning Bolt or Wrenn and 6. Obviously, like it could shave a turn off the clock or whatever, but Lava Spike is not a canonically good card versus combo, in my opinion. Post-board cards like Spell Pierce, obviously pretty good. Pyroblast, Red Elemental Blast, good versus cantrips. Null Rod and All-Star versus Storm. Like, one of the reasons I almost always play Null Rod is it basically defeats Storm if you play it on a reasonable board because it takes them a lot of time to remove it or try to figure out how to combo through it, which is not that easy for them. For Sneak and Show, Crop Rotation and Karakas is a good tool to have if you cannot stop their show and tell. If they put a Gristlebrand into play, you're not likely to win the game even if you Crop Rotation Karakas it because they might be able to assemble Sneak Attack, Emrakul, or Sneak Attack Gristlebrand the very next turn.
Yeah, that's the problem with the deck, right? Even if you get to remove Gristlebrand, you're probably dead next turn anyway, because they get to draw 7 cards, sometimes even 14 cards, and that's pretty much it.
That was definitely true in lands, because you don't put any pressure on their life total. It might be slightly different in this deck if you have a clock on them. The Crop Rotation Karakas might buy you enough time to just kill them. Like, maybe they go to exactly 7 on your attack or whatever, so they can't draw 7, or something similar like that.
When I have Karakas, the way I usually lose is Sneak Attack with a lot of red mana, or even just outright, the old Omniscience into Emrakul. Unless, I guess you could try to remove... How many ways do you have to remove the Omniscience? Destructive Revelry and Blast. Yeah, okay, but I guess Blast would have hit the Show and Tell anyway. Yeah, I guess that's just a losing battle, right? Trying to remove it.
The major problem with trying to kill the Omniscience once it's in play is you don't really have a good way to get priority before they get to cast a spell. The way you would normally do it is to put something into play that puts a trigger on the stack, so you would be able to kill it. But you can't do that with this deck with any of the cards that currently exist in it.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the list and there's really nothing that comes into playability.
Yeah, which is fine. I just plan on fighting on their spells on the stack.
Yeah, that's good. So you already mentioned that the deck feels really good and that there maybe could be a blue-white control deck out there that's good against NBC RUG Delver. But are there any other established decks in the metagame right now that you don't really want to face with this?
I believe if I were to play against a competent Dredge or Hogak player, that I think I would probably lose more often than not. The one card I don't play for my crop rotation package in the sideboard is Bojuka Bog. If you wanted to gain points versus decks, you could play a Bog. I don't feel that it's worth it, but both Dredge and Hogak, like the pure Hogak deck, I think would not be great matchups for this deck.
Yeah, I could see that. How do you generally feel about those two decks in the metagame right now? We don't really see a lot of graveyard hate right now, do we?
The other issue with those decks is I don't believe they're generally good versus depths. I would say they're unfavored versus depths on the whole. 1, access to Bojuka Bog via crop rotation. 2, discard plus a fast kill. Depths, if it's left to its own devices, kills on turn 2 or 3 like relatively often.
So, I mean, obviously you won the last big tournament with this list. But is this something that you would recommend for our listeners to copy? Or during the tournament, was there ever anything that came up that made you want to change a couple of cards?
I do not believe Rough Tumble is a good card right now.
Oh, really?
The reason I don't believe that is Renin 6 sort of covers all of your bases that Rough Tumble does. So the effect of Rough Tumble is that you side it in, and then you look at it while you have a true name in play and you're like, I wish this was almost anything else. That interaction used to come up a lot for me, and I used to just write it off. But I think with Rough Tumble not being as necessary versus tribal strategies, that you should just play another good card over it.
Tribal strategies? Never heard of though. I guess we're going to see about them later when Bob's data comes up. But have you ever put a True Name Nemesis on yourself? Have you ever given it protection from your own Rough Tumble?
I considered doing that once when I had a Pyroclasm in my hand.
Awesome. I really want to see that as the game-winning play, Commentators would lose their shit.
Well, I think what would happen is, the stream would, witch hunt you for, cheating and not killing your True Name Nemesis, and then only later would people realize you named yourself.
I guess Jarvis must be used to that, right? You probably played with Riftstorm Portal in your land stack at some point. But yeah, we already teased it. Bob is our podcast's only real statistician with regards to keeping track of the numbers of the legacy metagame. And
I think Jarvis would take offense to that because he is much more of a statistician than I am.
Yeah.
There are a lot of caveats to my data.
I've lit into Bob about how I think there are issues with this. The problem is no data is perfect, so I don't give him too much crap about it, but there are serious issues with any data set regarding Magic tournaments.
Yeah, and wasn't there this great quote by Andrew Ellenbogen about how Magic is all about how to properly extrapolate from an insufficient amount of data?
Small sample sizes.
And I think that's a great way to think about Magic.
Yeah, a lot of it is intuition, but if you're able to use your intuition and logic and back that up with data, it's some combination of the three eventually should get you to the right answer.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a lot of tools you would otherwise not have, right? It provides some kind of illumination in a dark, dark cave. And while it's not going to light the entire place, it's going to help you find the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's get to my metagame data. I posted it on Twitter. We'll have it in the show notes. It'll be in the article on Channel Fireball probably around, hopefully, I'll probably write it Monday, so hopefully Wednesday of next week. So around the 18th. So what the data is, essentially, it is Magic Online challenges and playoffs and MCQs where people have gone X and 2 or better, and then as well as in real life tournaments of 8 rounds or greater, so that's 128 players or more. So in terms of what that is, it's just basically tallying up all the numbers, so it's a quote-unquote winner's metagame rather than a base metagame of what people actually played. But I still find it useful to give a guide of what decks are winning. So you can see by far RUG Delver is the highest at 11.9%, which is almost twice as much as the next deck, which is Moonstompy at 6.8%. So that's to me, that does show that this RUG Delver has just been putting up some amazing results in even though I gave it a try and I didn't like it, I think I probably need to really consider it. I know it's one of the decks you're considering for the GP, Jarvis, so it's definitely something I probably want to come back to my Delver roots and think about it some more. But basically, there's been more dark depths than lately, so I have another breakdown basically showing that about a quarter of the decks play Wrenn and 6, about a quarter of the decks play Daze, and then Jace is at 18%, and Merit Lodge is at 12%, which is pretty high because it's higher than Grizzlebrand, which is only at 10%. Chalice decks are at 15%, Storm is at 9%, Dahlia decks are at 5%, which is extremely low because usually Death and Taxes is a very popular choice. So I think basically what this data set is showing, and we can kind of bear it out with our intuition, is that Wrenn and 6 decks have really pushed out a lot of these Thalia decks or made them a tier below what they once were. And in terms of other things, Force of Will is still 50% of the format, Brainstorm 60% of the format. Everything looks fairly healthy from a top view, like metagame perspective, in that it's very diverse. But I did pose this question on Twitter, which is like, pros of today's Legacy is it's very diverse. There's so many strategies you can play. The cons are games feel really swingy. And I think maybe people just like to complain on Twitter, but I asked people how they felt about the format, and people definitely focused way more on the cons than on some of the pros.
I guess that's a function of people talking on social media, because when they're unhappy, they're probably much more likely to reply in the first place. But I would still give some consideration to those unhappy people, because I'm also somewhat unhappy about certain aspects of the format, but I also do enjoy quite a lot of the playable decks. I'm just like,
It's just not Elves, and it's just not Maverick.
yeah. Both of those decks have a really hard time against Wrenn and 6. It's not even about those two decks in particular, because even though I'm heavily associated with Elves, that's really only been the last 6 years.
That's a pretty long time for Legacy. 6 years?
Yeah, I guess. But generally, I consider myself a guy who likes playing mid-range strategies, and I don't really see a lot of great mid-range options. I'm actually drawn towards the deck we just talked about, the NBC RUG Delver deck, which plays a decent mid-range game, as we just heard. But yeah, I'm just the kind of guy who wants to activate Knight of the Reliquary, so maybe there's green-white depth for me, even though it plays Giver of Runes, which apparently is a ton of ticks on Magic Online right now. I had no idea.
It's 16 tickets according to Mengucci.
All of the Modern Horizon cards are absurdly expensive because the price of the packs were really high, so I don't think as many drafts were done. There's also the fact that right after Modern Horizons came out, M20 came out, so it just was not opened in very large amounts, and so those cards are worth crazy amounts of money right now. Like Wrenn and 6 is like 130 ticks. Like, that is insane.
So should we be hoarding treasure chests right now, expecting them to rise in the future?
Yes, you should be, I think. And I actually had the theory that this was going to happen because if you track historically, all of the sets that come out in the summer are opened less to begin with anyways, and the doubling of the price of the booster pack was going to happen. And to top it off, these cards have not been printed in any other set, so the supply is already naturally low, and Modern is the most popular format.
Maybe we should have an MTG finance podcast, because that really makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I regret not actually figuring out that Wrenn was the card to buy. Instead, I bought a ton of Horizon lands on Magic Online. I think I have 56 plus on my account right now. I also did a ton of Magic Online Horizons drafts. I did 50-ish.
So is this Fury Islet in the deck just part of this big conspiracy trying to spec the Horizon lands?
Oh no, they don't naturally spike by themselves. Those cards are just good. Sunbaked Canyon is the best card in Modern Burn, and stuff like that.
I was just wondering. Going back to the data Bob mentioned, something I found especially interesting, and maybe Bob, you can help me out with that. I noticed that Force of Will is just 50%, and I think you said again 50%, basically implying it was 50% in the past as well. Is that normal? Because I think it used to be higher.
So it used to be higher just because there used to be more blue decks. Blue decks used to be more than 60%. Blue decks used to be closer to 70%. So the force count maybe was closer to 60%. That has, gone down, but I'm not necessarily against that. Even though the blue count has gone down, a lot of these decks, like Chalice decks, are also really good against combo. So we haven't seen necessarily an overwhelming amount of combo. But it is also worth noting that I think this is the first time that combo decks are over 33% of the metagame, and they're actually like doing better than aggro and control for the first time. So I think that is unique, and that's kind of an interesting aspect of today's Legacy.
Okay, that's pretty cool. How do you feel about playing something like a very dedicated Storm deck? Maybe even going as far as, well, I don't really want to say Belcher, but okay, not a Storm deck, but a combo deck. Black-Red Reanimator. Because in your data, it's 50% Forcible, and Black-Red Reanimator is equipped pretty well to beat that. And also only 15% Chalice decks. That also doesn't really strike me as too many. Mm-hmm. And no Thalia decks pretty much at all. But I guess Death in Texas, most combo players would say that's a good matchup.
Well, every time I talk to Eric, he says that like there's no bad matchups. The worst matchups are like the Chalice matchups, and they're still like slightly favorable. So if you believe Eric, then you should always be playing Black-Red Reanimator, basically.
I was actually watching his stream right before, and he was talking about exactly that.
Yeah, I mean, he does say that like in real life it's a little bit dicier because then you get like some players like Miracles players who play Rest in Peace, and he doesn't side for that. Or like Delver players, have some random hate that he's not ready for. So that's the main problem with Black-Red Reanimator, is if he sideboards wrong, he can just like instantly lose game 2. But the deck is very powerful, and it's also very good against other combo decks. I don't think it's as good against Depths as he makes it out to be. I think that matchup is either in Depth's favor or very close. I'm willing to believe it's very close. The other thing, too, about Black-Red Reanimator is, like, I think it actually takes a surprising amount of skill, mostly when it comes down to sideboarding and mulligan decisions. So I think, like, even if I were to pick the deck up, I could probably get to, like, 80%, but the last 20%, you actually do need to put in the time to learn the deck.
I actually registered Black-Red Reanimator in Pro Tour 25, mostly for the first reason where I expected a ton of Storm and Sneak and Show. I did not expect that many Eldrazi decks or Miracles decks or Taxes decks or whatever. I did expect Grixis Control, and I thought generally Reanimator was good versus most of those, and that was the deck I was actually winning with the most before that tournament. I had probably a 70% win rate on Magic Online on a secret account.
Oh, whoa. Secret account. Are you still using it, or is it retired?
It's retired.
It is retired. I just found it super interesting, what people choose for their account names. Because Eric, he actually named his secret account Dovin's Gatekeeper, which is, I guess, refreshingly random. And I always wonder what other people name themselves after.
That one was named Aftermath FTW, which was actually one of my old accounts from 2005. And I just reactivated it to test for that tournament. And Aftermath was a WoW guild I was in.
Okay. Are you still playing War Vanilla right now?
No, I can't do that to myself again. That's too many hours.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same boat. I enjoyed War Vanilla a lot. But if I did that again, I'd have no time left for anything.
But so basically I agree with all Bob's points. I think the deck is really good. It's probably underplayed for how good it is. And the reason it's underplayed for how good it is that it feels really bad to lose to people who want to beat you. And it's also kind of hard to just predict IRL what kind of hate they're going to have sometimes.
Yeah, Eric mentioned when he gets hit by Leyline when he doesn't really expect it, or like Bob mentioned, when Rest in Peace hits when the opponent doesn't expect it, they lose the game for free at that point. And from there, you have to win basically every game that's actually being played. And that can be pretty rough at times. But yeah, I feel like the deck could be pretty good to get a decent win rate and also make some money on Magic Online with it right now. But of course, in an event like a GP, you don't really get to play a lot of matches. So you're somewhat prone to hitting a bad streak of variants. But in general, I think this is a deck I would recommend if you're unsure what to play and you felt like, yeah, maybe subscribing to Eric's Patreon. By the way, this is not supposed to be a sneaky advertisement for his Patreon, but I know that he has a really good sideboard strategy or general guide to Black-Red Reanimator up there. So shoutouts to our co-host Eric Landon. Bob, is there anything else that sticks out to you with regards to data? By the way, you can find that on itsjulian.com as well. It's in Bob's Channel Fireball article on Wednesday, probably. So I'm looking at the finishes, and I see Fs as 4 finishes, which puts it at 1.1% of the metagame.
One interesting note that Bob wrote down that I don't think he went over was I think he thinks the snow control deck is incredibly overhyped. I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it kind of is the same thing about Grixis control in the previous time point.
I think Grixis control put up way more results though, but yeah, go on.
The point of both of those decks, in my opinion, the macro archetype for both of those decks is the same to me. I think the overall point is the people who played that deck that did well with either of those decks are just generally good Magic players. You almost never saw weaker players do well with that deck, right? And I think part of that is they basically force you into spots where you have to decide what role you want to take. Like, do you want to try to, like, grind your opponent out with removal? Or do you want to try to, like, play your creatures? Like, and the problem is your clock's not that fast either as well. They don't, those decks generally do not have fast clocks. So you're almost always forced into a situation where you have to grind the game such that your opponent has literally nothing and then kill them with your leftovers. Like Ice Vein Collateral, Baleful Strix, Plague Engineer. They don't generally play good win cons because good win cons don't generate value. I think that is why you do not see weaker players do well with that deck, generally speaking, because it's hard to play in such a way that your opponent has nothing and you're not.
Well, a lot of players have started playing Tarmogoyf. Even Stryfo's playing Tarmogoyf in his Punishing Thieves deck, and I kind of like that as a more proactive, just like, Tarmogoyf is just a really good card right now because Baleful Strix is not because of Wrenn and 6, so...
Yeah, so the Tarmogoyf alleviates the exact problem that I was alluding to.
Yeah, but is that... I guess the numbers show that it's not necessarily the way to go, because we had that discussion on our Everyday Channel Discord the other day, where we were wondering, is the lack of a proper win condition really something you want to change? Or is it something in Grixis Control we were specifically talking about? Is that just something that you have to accept and roll with it? Because otherwise, you'd be compromising the versatility and the general grindy approach of your deck too much by putting a quote-unquote stupid card in your deck, like, for example, Tarmogoyf, or anything else that's a big bad beater.
I mean, I think it depends on the metagame. I think the metagame shifted in such a way that, like, yeah, you need the actual win condition, and Tarmogoyf is just actually a good card right now. I think if the meta were, like, all control decks or whatever, then you probably want to do the dirtly values thing, but the meta is very much not like that right now, so...
But at that point, I'm wondering if you still want to play the deck in the first place, if you have other options.
I also think it's potentially behind against Delver decks. I mean, I think you can definitely build these Grixis shells to beat Delver decks, but the problem is the Delver decks have access to more powerful plays early and days, and as I mentioned earlier, these plays just snowball. So, like, you can play Arcanist and with days backup, and then the Grixis Control deck will just be, like, out of it. That's, like, the main problem with playing Control right now, is Arcanist is such a good card advantage engine, and to a lesser extent, Wrenn and 6. So it's like, if the aggro deck has card advantage, then what edge does the Control deck really have?
Red Hot Arcanist is brought up a lot by traditional control players like Anorak, for example. And they talk a lot about how Red Hot Arcanist is a big, big problem for them to deal with. Because it's another card that they must answer immediately, or they will fall heavily behind quickly. It feels like the card is doing a lot of work, and along with Wrenn and 6 is one of the major reasons why we don't really see many good, dedicated control or midrange options in the data right now. Like, what are your premier midrange options? I guess Blue-White Stoneblade, and then not really all that much, right?
And no bad cards, Rug.
Yeah, I guess that's grouped under Timo Delver in the list that Bob provided. Oh, and for the people who are wondering what we mean when we say that the Snow deck isn't really performing right now, the Snow deck, I guess we have the 4-color and the 5-color versions. If we combine those two, it has 3 finishes. To provide some perspective, RUG Delver has 44. Moonstompy has 25.
That's
Blue-White Stoneblade has 23.
That's pretty pronounced.
Oh, well, you're talking about the... there's 2 4-color snow decks. There's one with black and one with white. If you count, like, all of the snow decks, then it's 6 plus 2 plus 1, so 9. But still, it's significantly less than...
Oh, yeah, there's another one up there.
Yeah. So it's still significantly less than Delver, even though, like, a lot of people like playing, Culligan's Command and Jace together.
So yeah, maybe not the kind of deck you want to play right now, but that's just our interpretation of the data provided. I think the deck used to do pretty well in the beginning. I think Darrow Ayers had a pretty sweet list that we also talked about on the podcast that he found some success with. But yeah, let's see what the future holds for the Snow deck. Editor's note, it won the very next SCG Open. In speaking of new influences, there's a new set coming out, I think pretty soonish, right? Throne of Eldraine?
Yeah, I believe the pre-release is...
I think it's like the week of Atlanta.
The 28th. No, it's not the week of Atlanta. They don't schedule pre-releases during GPs for the most part. It happened once in a modern GP and Sao Paulo, but this time it's the 28th.
Okay, so it's right after the...
pre-release.
Okay, cool.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and the overall flavor of the set I find really, really cool. It has this fairy tale theme going on. It doesn't really take itself super seriously, which is something I always enjoy a lot. I'm also a huge fan of, I guess Onslaught didn't take itself very seriously as well. And even though it does have a lot of dark and grim cards, it also does have a lot of happy, but I guess we're getting a little bit off course. We're still a competitive podcast.
I love the art. Like, the art direction has been, like, much better. And I also think some of the collector's edition art is super cool. Like, I've seen, like, Flaxen Intruder. Most of the split cards and collector's edition art looks really cool. By the way, do either of you guys know how much those collector's edition booster packs are selling for? Are they, like...
I heard $25.
Oh, my gosh. That's so much.
But I'm not 100% sure. That was what I heard at one point. I could be wrong.
That's also what I heard.
Okay.
That's probably right, but that's like I don't know, how much do regular boosters go for? Like $4?
$4.
So that's like 6 times as much. So that's really steep. But it might be correct to get them just because, you know, people love Pimp Magic cards, and the art really is just that much better than the regular ones from what I've seen so far.
Maybe just hoard them. But yeah, there's a couple of cards we have picked out, and we're not sure that all of them are gonna see Legacy play, but we think they're good enough that we should talk about them on the show today. The first one is Once Upon a Time. It's an instant for a colorless and a green, and if you play Once Upon a Time as your first spell of the game, you get to cast it for free. We've never seen that broken, right? And what it does, it looks at the top 4 cards of your library and lets you pick either a creature or a land card from among them, and ship the rest to the bottom. So how do you feel about the card? I think someone mentioned it could go into the Griselbrand deck in Modern. I'm blanking on the name right now.
Neoform,
yeah, that's the one.
Jinx.
Yeah, this card is, I mean, free spells have historically been broken. This one doesn't have an effect on the battlefield, so I could see it not being broken. It also has to be in your opening hand, but, you know, we also just did add the London Mulligan. A lot of people have been talking about this deck in Modern and Legacy. In Modern, they've been talking about Neoform, Amulet, Tron. It's similar to Ancient Stirrings. It's not quite Ancient Stirrings, but it potentially does help you assemble something like Tron. And in Legacy, I think the easiest fit would actually be Dark Depths. And I have no idea if it would be good in Dark Depths or not. I would have to test it myself, but I think it has a lot of potential. I think Sylvan Scrying is kind of like a card. It's just like a 6 against every matchup. And if this is like a great card, I could totally see just replacing Sylvan Scrying. Jarvis, what are your thoughts?
Similar to your thoughts, two decks you didn't mention in Modern that I think really could use this card are Devoted Druid, first off, and second, Green-White Eldrazi. The best land in the Green-White Eldrazi deck often is Eldrazi Temple, and you don't have that many turn 1 plays. Like, your turn 1 play in that deck is either Ancient Stirrings or Noble Hierarch, and you also float out a lot, so this card is good if you have 2 mana lying around on later turns. So Green-White Eldrazi, Devoted Druid both fit the bill. In Legacy, I'm less sure that it's good, mostly because it is nice that it has that split option, but I think a lot of the times Depths especially needs to find the piece, like with certainty. It is nice that I can find Hexmage or Dark Confound or Reclaimer, but the jury's out for me as well in Legacy.
I guess people would like it if it puts the card in the graveyard.
Oh, that would have so much broken
Grizzly
potential.
Salvage.
Yeah.
That'd just be a broken Grizzly Salvage, which is already kind of a broken card, but Also, Grizzly Salvage costs green-black and is never reduced, so...
So it's a card we might see, but I'm also not sure. I do like the design of it, because they're clearly trying to give non-blue decks the option of filtering, and maybe we're gonna get there at some point. So, another card. When it was spoiled, I got a lot of Twitter messages from people.
Of course you did.
Yeah. It's Witch's Vengeance. It's a sorcery for a colorless and 2 black. Creatures of the creature type of your choice get -3/-3 until end of turn. I really hope this card will not see any legacy play at all. It's just, I don't know what's going on. How's there so much tribal hate coming out of Wizards these days?
Their design ignores formats that aren't standard. You know that, right? For sets like this.
Yeah,
so
of course.
This set is supposed to have tribal themes in it. So I think this is a check on the set itself. There's supposed to be like a fairies theme. I think there's a knight theme. So Witch's Vengeance is like a check on those strategies. And honestly, for like legacy play, this looks much worse than Toxic Deluge or Plague Engineer to me.
Yeah, that's true. Or even Dead of Winter. I think you tried to make it work at some point.
I had an obsession with Dead of Winter, then I realized my deck was just a bad version of the 4-color snow deck, so I gave up on it.
So yeah, this is more a card that does scare me, but I agree, or I'd rather want to agree. It's definitely not going to see any legacy play, and everyone should totally forget about it. Another card, Wishclaw Talisman. It's an artifact for a colorless and a black. When it enters the battlefield, you put 3 wish counters on it, and then when you pay a colorless, tap it, and remove a wish counter from it, you get to search your library for any card, and your opponent gains control of it. So it's basically a 3-mana demonic tutor, and if your opponent ever gets to untap with it, he gets to do the same for 1 mana. So I've seen Storm talk about this card basically as I guess most of the time it's going to be better than Grim Tutor if you want that kind of effect. Obviously, it's worse if you want to pass the turn.
Yeah, you don't lose the life, but then it's weak to stuff like Null Rod, and I don't really see it in Storm, because Storm, it's so important to be able to like flashback your tutor with Past in Flames. So like maybe a certain Storm deck could play it. I was thinking more along the lines of like maybe Goblin Welder or Goblin Engineer shenanigans, but then I guess you're in black-red. So yeah, I guess I currently don't see a home for it, but it's very powerful, so I have
a few ideas, a few things were pointed out to me. This card is really powerful with Karn the Great Creator, because you do it and then they have this thing that doesn't do anything. It also finds your Karns, and you can also wish for it for Karn. I don't know the exact shell, but maybe like blue-black, I don't know, nonsense, Planeswalkers, the old Tezzerator deck, but cutting Tezzerets for Karns and Talismans. I don't know. I haven't worked out a shell, but a card like this, once you see it broken, you'll be like, oh, why didn't I think of that?
Mm-hmm. So it's either going to do nothing or like something really powerful, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's either a 0 or a 10, I think, is the reality.
You know what I want to do with a card? I want to untap it in response to its ability.
Yeah, you can do that with Voltaic Key or Manifold Key. Manifold Key is also in Standard, for what's worth. It's in M20.
So yeah, maybe there's a deck for that out there. Actually, there's this super crazy deck. What's the name?
Susurus.
Yeah, you can read my mind.
I streamed that deck on Monday.
Oh yeah, what did you think?
Can we quickly mention what the deck does for the listeners who can't read my mind?
So basically, it's a artifact-based deck with like all the Sol lands, and I mean all of them, like literally all 4. So it plays Crystal Vein in addition to Ancient Tomb and City of Traders, and I guess it also plays Inventor's Fair, which is not a Sol land. But basically, the goal of the deck is to get a Mystic Forge in play, and then you have all these artifacts that just generate mana, like Grim Monolith, Basalt Monolith, and Voltaic Key, Manifold Key. So you basically make infinite mana, or you don't make infinite mana, but once you have Mystic Forge, you get to churn through your deck until you hit Paradox Engine, and then that really goes off, and then you find Karn, and then you find Ballista for the kill. So it's actually a pretty fast deck. It's like fairly vulnerable, because it only has like 8 cards that do anything, like Karn and Mystic Forge, but like even if you like Surgical Karn, for instance, like if you just force Karn and Surgical it can be like kind of stuck. So I think, it's a very powerful deck, but I think it still needs to be further refined.
I would like to note that doesn't really happen if you think your opponent has Surgical, because you just side in the Ballista so you can fare for it.
Sure. Why did you feel like it was behind against Delver?
Wasteland's really good versus those decks, and you can never beat a Null Rod, and Ancient Grudge was also pretty tough to beat.
Makes sense.
Oh, I played the last match of that night. I played the literal mirror, and it's really unpleasant. Whoever cards the other person first is basically a lock to win.
Oh my god, dude. That sounds really, really disgusting.
It's not very interesting. You know exactly what's going to happen. You can look at your opening hands and almost determine who's going to win.
Pretty much, right? Wow. Another card that was spoiled, that also gave me a lot of notifications, is Wildborn Preserver. For 1 green, it's a 2/2 elf archer with flash and reach. And when another non-human creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can pay X and put X +1/+1 counters on it. And only as I read it right now do I realize that it triggers every single time, so you can actually keep growing it.
I don't see why you would play this card. The only thing it does is block Delver of Secrets, and that's like, it still costs 2 mana, so...
It also blocks Married Large, it does fog Griselbrand, and there's applications for that. The problem with it is that outside of that, it's not really that great of a card for what Elves wants to do in the first place. It's much more like a mid-range aggressive card. And I am on record asking for a playable Elf with Reach that is also playable when the Reach is irrelevant. But the card I have in mind is always like a 0/1 Lano Elves, which I guess would be kind of like a tree elf or something. But yeah, I don't think this card really goes into current version of Elves, other than something people in the Elves Discord have been brewing, Beatdown Elves. I haven't really played it yet, so I will somewhat reserve judgment.
That just sounds really bad. It's like, if you're doing Beatdown, then there's like humans and slivers that kind of do it better.
Wait, so why did we delete the other card?
Charming Prince? Do you like Charming Prince?
I actually have a lot of thoughts about it.
Alright, let's talk about Charming Prince, but I deleted it, so you're gonna have to go find it.
Alright, Charming Prince was... Okay, let's give the full context for this card. One, Reed Duke was given this card as his spoiler card.
Classic.
And, this honestly makes sense for him, right? It would only have been slightly better if this card were a human knight for his spoiler. But let me explain. The application I see for this card in Legacy and Modern is honestly the humans deck.
And for those wondering what the card does, it's a 2/2 human for a colorless and a white, and when it enters the battlefield, you can either scry 2, gain 3 life, or exile another target creature you own, and return to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So it's basically a Flicker Wisp for your own creatures, but it can't target the opponent's stuff. And you don't get to blink your own while to reset it.
Right. It is a 2-drop instead of a 3-drop, which Flicker Wisp is. And Scry 2 is pretty good when you don't know if the other 2 motes don't look particularly relevant. Like a 2/2 Scry 2 is not the best card, but it's still like a pretty good card, right? If you're playing against randomly like an aggro deck, gain 3, that's a lot of life. Like, that's 1 bolt or something like that. And really the most exciting part of the card, I think, is the last text. If you flicker Palace Jailer, that's really, really, really powerful. Also, you can set up the recruiter chains that Death and Taxes does, right?
Mm-hmm. You can also flicker Thalia's Lieutenant.
And no, even more cute is if you have multiple lieutenants / champion of the parishes, you can flicker your second Charming Prince and it'll slowly create a loop of counters on it every end step. Essentially, you'll put more counters on your guys.
Oh, wow, that's an actual engine.
Yeah, I think the card is pretty good in humans and not the best in other places. You might see it as a one of in Death and Taxes or something like that, because like gain 3 is not a relevant effect in some games. Like if you're playing against like a burn deck, you just want to draw all of these, right?
I can see it in maybe like Modern, but in Legacy, I just don't think games are coming down to like incremental value anymore, and I disagree that like 2/2 Scry 2 is good. Like 2/2 draw a card would be good, but Scry 2 is just so much worse than draw a card. But so I'm skeptical that he's playing Legacy, but I'll be happy if Eddie Zamora proves me wrong.
So I think one thing you're missing about this is it doesn't naturally die into Ren 6, and it doesn't naturally die to Plague Engineer, and it can let you set up board states where you can get rid of those cards like permanently. If you have a Palace Jailer and your opponent has a Plague Engineer, you can jailer it. Then if they play another Plague Engineer, you can jailer that one too with this. So that's kind of nice. And that's like a pretty common use case.
I talked to a couple of Death and Taxes players, and they were not super excited, but they could see a slot for it.
Right.
They said it's nice to keep your Vial on 2, it's another human for Cavern of Souls. It has a lot of small incremental advantage stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
And as Bob mentioned, maybe this is not the world for small incremental advantage right now, but as a card, it's pretty okay. Okay, I guess that's not the nicest thing to say about a legacy card.
Yeah, I'm looking for haymakers now, so let's move on to the next card, which I think is a potential haymaker. I don't know if it'll see legacy play. It'll be kind of fringe, but it's Questing Beast.
Ooh,
and
this
it's
one's
just
nice.
I like this one so much. It's 2 green for a legendary beast, and holy crap, does it have a lot of text. Vigilance, Death Touch, Haste. Can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented. Whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that player controls. So there's just so many things going on. It has
And it's a 4/4.
It's a 4/4. And it has all these clauses. So it has this combat damage clause, which makes it good against lands like Maze of Ith. And it also is good against True Name Nemesis. If True Name blocks it, guess what? Damage can't be prevented from protection, so the True Name is dead. And then it also has this sort of Fire and Ice text where you get to attack your opponent and then hit their Planeswalker. And then added to all of that, it's Vigilance, Death Touch, Haste, so it's good on offense and defense. And when it's on offense, it can't be blocked by small creatures, so they can't make a bunch of creatures gang up to trade with it. So I think when this card's in play, it's very powerful. The downside, obviously, is that it is a 4-mana spell in a Daze format. So I could definitely see this card in something like Sylvan Plug. I would be kind of excited to actually try that deck with this card, but the double green is also kind of tricky.
It's kind of hilarious how many abilities they manage to slap on their creature without actually breaking it.
I have a tweet I made about this set, which is every card just has 9,000 words on it.
Yeah, it's wild. Because a lot of the cards are Aftermath, or not Aftermath,
Adventure.
but On Adventure,
Yeah.
which we should explain to some of our listeners. I haven't seen an Adventure card that's necessarily great in Legacy yet,
Yeah.
but maybe we will see one. But Adventure is basically you can play it from your hand as a creature or a sorcery. If you play it as a sorcerer an instant, you get to exile it and then replay the creature later, kind of like Flashback. So. Yeah, and those cards have so much text on it. It's just you're reading a book, basically.
Yeah. The tweet I had in question was I tweeted basically a GIF of a penguin reading a book over and over.
That wasn't regard to the card.
No, it was in regards to this set because every card has 9,000 words. Anyways, this card actually kind of makes me mad of how pushed it is. Just read all of the words on it. There's no bad words on it, except it costs 4.
But that's the problem when they've printed all these planeswalkers that accrue value, is that you literally need your creatures to be ridiculous
I agree.
or have haste. So it's R&D basically. They go through these cycles of pushing cards, and they're like, oh wait, hold on, we need answers to them, and then pushing those answers. And I think we've just seen so much power creep lately. So far, I don't think anything in Eldraine is absurdly powerful like we saw in Modern Horizons and War of the Spark for Eternal formats. But it does worry me slightly that if every year we get this absurd amount of power creep, then our formats might be less and less recognizable. But I guess there's always a ban list to clean things up. But still,
I wonder if there will be a cooler set in the future, basically where they would pull a mechanical masks thing.
Or Kamigawa block.
Yeah, Kamigawa was the same. Yeah, exactly.
Bob probably doesn't remember that.
It wouldn't really do much for Legacy because we would still have the busted cards around, but I guess Quest Increased also isn't going to break the format. The card is pretty cool for all Nick Fetish players. Where do you see this card make an impact outside of that? And I guess Sylvan Plug.
Well, let me explain a few small things that this card does that may not be apparently obvious. So the clause that combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented overrides a bunch of things that are not intuitively obvious. The first and foremost thing is it overrides protection from True Name Nemesis or Mother of Runes.
Oh, Mother of Runes is a good one.
This other thing it actually overrides that isn't as relevant anymore is Glacial Chasm. So, those are small things, but, they add up. If you play one in your, Maverick deck, it has haste, it has Vigilance, has Death Touch, and occasionally you'll, swing through a board that's, all Mother of Runes or whatever, small creatures, and just deal your opponent 4. Or Elves. Elves can't block this, so if you put a GT on Questing Beast, yeah, I'm just saying.
And then you get to deal 4 to Nissa.
Which Nissa? Voice of Zendikar or?
Well, people are trying to make Voice of Zendikar a thing because of Plague Engineer.
I know. It's not
just
good.
not on board.
So, are we talking about the next card? Because I'm actually excited about that one. But
Yeah, you want to introduce it, Jarvis?
yeah, all right. It is. Ooh, the original spoiler was actually in Chinese, but I'm not going to read it.
Can you?
Some of the characters. The problem is the Chinese characters for most Magic like effects are not commonly used in like everyday conversation. Anyways, the card is Emery, Lurker of the Loch. It's 2 and a blue for a legendary creature, Merfolk Wizard. The spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control, which is basically affinity for artifacts. When Emery, Lurker of the Loch comes into play, put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard. It has an ability. Tap, choose target artifact in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn, and it's a 1/2. So I have a lot of thoughts about this card, specifically in Modern. The thing that was pointed out to me is if you have Jeskai Ascendancy and 2 Mox Ambers, you can go through your entire deck.
I've heard the same thing with Mishra's Bauble.
Yeah, but those are delayed triggers, so you don't get to draw the cards immediately. True. So what Emery does with... I'll explain the combo real quick. So suppose you have Emery not summoning sick, Mox Amber ×2, and Jeskai Ascendancy. You play your first Mox, you trigger the untap from Emery, and you loot. Even if you have no cards in hand, you just mill yourself for 1. You activate it, target your other Mox Amber... Or, sorry, you play your second Mox Amber, Legend Rule the first Mox Amber into your graveyard, do the same thing, activate Emery targeting your Mox Amber. It has untapped from the Jeskai Ascendancy. It also gets +1/+1. So it could just kill your opponent by itself, or you could just mill yourself floating a blue floating 2 blue mana every time to just mill yourself into a Walking Ballista, tap the Emery to target Walking Ballista, and cast it for X=20.
You can also do it with Mox Opal, right?
You would need Metalcraft. So you might not have Metalcraft, but you probably do because your deck that is based around Emery probably plays a bunch of 0-drop artifacts like Mishra's Bauble or whatever. Yeah. I don't know how you would build the exact deck in Legacy. I suspect you don't want to rely on Jeskai Ascendancy because that bites it pretty hard to Power Blast. Perhaps you could build like a Chalice-ish deck with some... I don't know. I would have to think about it. But the fact of the matter is that tap ability is really strong.
Mm-hmm. I could see it in like Urza Stompy, something like that.
Yeah, that could happen. It's better if you can somehow abuse the graveyard ability. I guess it sort of feeds itself, right?
Mm-hmm. It's also just a value engine if they don't kill it. And it costs like potentially 1 mana, so that's, we've seen 1 mana 1/2s that have wreaked some havoc on Legacy before.
Well, also 1 mana 1/1s and the like. One other thing that it's just good to grind with Mishra's Bauble, as pointed out. Just drawing card every turn is like kind of a broken effect, right?
I also want to point out that the artwork is a throwback to Monty Python. Did you notice?
I have. Mm-hmm. I don't
well, isn't the characters from like King Arthur? This whole set is like King Arthur plus Brothers Grimm.
It's basically a reference. I guess it's also more King Arthur-like, but it's also a reference to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where the guy argues strange women lying in ponds, distributing swords, is no system of government.
Oh, okay. I've seen that on Twitter, and now I understand it. Yes.
Oh, wow. That's
okay.
Something.
Actually, Julian, I think you had some like a lot of these Brothers Grimm's tales were based on German fairy tales, and you were telling us that like the German version was significantly darker. So I don't know if you have a couple in mind that you might want to share with the podcast.
Yeah. A lot of stories are actually made more suitable for children because a lot of the stuff I had read to me as a kid was a lot more gruesome. And as a kid, you don't really realize that other countries have less crazy stories. For example, Snow White. I don't really know how Snow White actually ends in the international version, but...
She marries the prince with the slipper. Oh, wait, hold on. That's Cinderella. Snow White, she kisses the prince or something, and it saves...
No, the kiss... the prince kisses her.
Yeah, okay.
But what do you do about the queen in the international version?
Maybe she dies. I don't know.
So in the German version, Snow White marries the prince and she becomes the new queen. And at her wedding, they invite the old queen. And they have those slippers made from iron. And they heat them up as hot as they can. And the evil queen is made to dance in them in front of everyone until she dies.
Holy cow.
Wow, that is just like extra
dark.
cruelty.
Yeah, as a kid you don't realize. Because literally every fairy tale story in Germany is messed up big time. There's also one about the boy who sucks his own thumb all the time, basically like a baby. And one day his parents invite this psychopath, Taylor, with these giant scissors to ambush the boy and cut off both his thumbs. There's literally blood everywhere. Like, I will never forget the image of that thing in the book. There's literally blood all over the place in the book. And that's the kind of thing you grow up as a child in Germany. So if you ever wondered whether I'm weird, maybe that's probably part of it. So if we actually piqued your interest in these kind of stories, one of the books is called Struwwelpeter, and I'm going to put the link in the show notes on itsjulian.com.
Sounds fun. Cool. Okay, let's wrap up since we've gone for almost an hour and a half now. Let's just do one more preview, which is the Royal Scions. It's a 3-mana planeswalker, 1+ blue-red. +1, draw a card, +1, target creature gets +2, +0 and gains first strike and trample. -8, draw 4. When you do, the Royal Scions deal damage to any target equal to the number of cards in your hand, and it starts at 5 loyalty. The big thing that jumps out to me on this card is it just starts at 5 loyalty. Like, how do you kill it? Like, even an opposing, like, I guess you would need a Delver plus a Lightning Bolt. So the 5 loyalty is extremely good. The loot effect is powerful. The plus might also go well with, like, Dreadhorde Arcanist. So some people have suggested this as a one-of in Blue-Red Delver. I'm not sure because the bar is really high. Like, you could just play a True Name Nemesis instead. Do you guys think this card might be playable?
I'm not thrilled about it, really.
Honestly, if you ask me, also, not really. I think this is one of the more fine planeswalkers in the sense that it's not super pushed or super powerful. But I think I would enjoy a format more if planeswalkers were more like this one. Because everybody likes it when you get that super powerful planeswalker, and it's a ton of fun and everything, but eventually you realize that's probably not where you want to be headed. So I kind of like the design of the card, even though it's a little hard to kill for a 3-mana walker, but it doesn't really seem like something you want to be doing in Legacy right now. Also, regarding Dreadhorde Arcanist, is there something in blue and red with converted mana cost 2 or 3 that you want to cast?
Yeah, it's like a Braid is the only one that commonly sees play.
Yeah, agreed. Only a Braid. I was trying to
Daze.
Think. Well, that doesn't do it.
If they cast a spell with the trigger on the stack, you can Daze it. Also, you have to have plussed it on the Dreadhorde Arcanist. Yeah.
I'm thinking about this. Nah, this card does not look good to me. Good enough to me for Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is our verdict on the spoilers. Maybe there's going to be a couple new ones in the near future, and we will certainly discuss those on the next episode. But yeah, this is how we feel about the Legacy metagame right now, right before the GP. So if you have any questions, you can hit us up on Twitter, you can join our Twitch streams, or if you want to support the running of the show and get access to our exclusive podcast Discord, you can join our Patreon on patreon.com/everydayeternal. And where can people find you specifically? Let's start with Jarvis. Jarvis, where can people get hold of you?
You can find me on Twitter. My username is JKYU06. I have a YouTube and Twitch channel. Both are Jarvis Yu. And those are the best places to get in touch with me.
Awesome. And Bob, have you actually put in some streams ever since the last episode?
I did want to. I think I streamed once, and I think it was pretty successful. I'm going to be doing more in the future, but I say that every time. So maybe I need to really make myself commit to a plan, and then I'll announce it at the next podcast, I guess. I've just been really busy, and I haven't had that much time to test. And when I test, it's like sometimes I want to like keep my testing secret. So it's maybe after Atlanta, we'll see.
Ooh, Bob is gonna come out with the next version of Death in Texas. Death in Texas Fs, I can see it.
Don't hold your breath.
See, he's not answering. He knows it's true. And if he did, I would have totally removed it in Audacity. So yeah, if you want to find me, I'm on twitter.com/itsjulian23 or on twitch.tv/itsjulian. And with that, I want to close it out, but not before giving shoutouts to our new Patreon Benjamin on the Delver tier, as well as our recurring Eternal Witness supporters, Matt and James, and our Grizzleprint tier supporters, Bachu, Scott, Kurush, and Jeremy. Thank you so much for chipping in to allow us to produce the show. And all of you, tune in for the next show when we'll discuss how everything went at GP Atlanta. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.